Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today I'm continuing schooling Bailador. And today the emphasis is going to be on the canter. Now this is the next day after you saw the last video of him. So I'm also pushing to see how much I can sustain without him getting sore in the back, which I'm happy to say he didn't get after these two sessions. Now he does start out a little stiff here. The first thing I noticed is he was a little stiffer in his back today and not quite giving me as much lift through the back as he'd done the day before. But as I said, I had done all that sitting trot with him the day before, which I've never been able to achieve before. So it didn't surprise me that he's a little bit stiff this morning coming out. If you notice, his hind legs are moving a little stiffer than they were the previous day. But he works out of it quite nicely and ends up in a really good place with the canter. And I was able to do that and take him all the way through flying changes, as you'll see here. And the next day, his back was perfectly fine. In fact, our chiropractor was coming for him the next day or the day after that, and she said his back was the best she had ever seen it. So that was really great. So all of this work that I've done in 2 days in a row, kind of pushing the envelope, so to speak, did not result in him being sore, which would have done years ago when I tried this horse. And really up until now, every time I tried to canter him, that was the problem, is he'd always get very sore in his back. But you'll see some interesting things here today with him as I get into the canter work that show just how far he's come. So here in the beginning, I'm just starting out in the walk, as always, letting the horse stretch out. But do notice here, if you were to compare this with the video from the other day, he's a little stiffer behind in his steps, but he's starting to work out of it here as he goes. He gets into a nice stretch pretty quickly. He does show a few moments that you'll see with this horse, and like many horses that have had a lot of problems, the problems don't just disappear overnight, but it is great here how you'll see as I go through this ride today how once in a while he decides he wants to try to look at something a little bit, but all I have to do is put my legs on or bend him a little bit, and he immediately just goes right back to work, as opposed to what I would have had in days of old, where it would have been, an hour-long battle with him just over some leaf on the ground or something like this. So he's coming around, really getting in the age now really, really well. And when he does have a problem, kind of clicks in to his old sort of mode of thinking, which was that anytime he didn't want to do anything, he would just start resisting and fighting with you. And I think he'd been very good at this, if you've heard me say before, as he was just a horse that felt like he would fight you forever. But notice how nicely the walk can come up now. And that's the biggest thing that we're looking at in these last two videos with him, is how now his neck can come up without him breaking over at the third or fourth vertebrae. So that's a big step in the right direction, and you really can't bring them up until they do. Some horses are more severely broken than others. And now we noticed, for instance, with Zoolander, who just came back. Now, he had really bad feet, and we had spent a fortune on trying to get him sound with shoers, and he just needed time off his feet. So we turned him out on a 3,000-acre ranch for 14 months and just brought him back, and his feet are now in wonderful shape. And he was also a horse that was terribly broken in the neck. Now, the interesting thing, after that year and a half out there, his neck is not overflexing at the third vertebrae at all. So once again, just showing how much time it takes just to heal that. Think about yourself if you've ever pulled a ligament. And as any doctor will tell you, it takes longer to heal ligaments than it takes to heal bones. So in the case of overflexion in the neck, what that really is the tendons and ligaments that hold the spine together at that point have become stretched out to the point that we now have a larger space in between the joints. They're not fitting nicely together, so they tend to just break over. And of course, this kind of work can, eventually it would oppress the nerves inside the spine and this sort of thing. So you can just imagine the kind of horrible problems that can result from being overflexed in the neck. I mean, imagine yourself. I mean, we've all known people who've had back surgeries and things like that. And the spinal cord runs through the middle of that neck. So if those vertebrae that are meant to protect it get stretched out, now you've got basically, you're also overstretching that nerve inside the horse's neck, which can lead to great deal of pain. So thinking about all that, so just know, once again, as you've heard me say many times, that when you go out to look for horses, the first thing you look at is whether they have been overflexed in the neck, because you know that when you find that, it's going to take at least a year in the stretch to just solve that problem. Of course, once we solve that problem, most of the other problems disappear. The same thing here. You see how he gets a little bit resistive there, but I'm able to just put my leg right on. Now you notice how I kind of sway back and forth. What I'm really doing is following. That's where he's going. So my hands are just following wherever he's going with his mouth, so he can't escape the contact, which is very different than seesawing back and forth on the horse's mouth. I'm never pulling on the rein in this session. I'm simply letting my arms follow where he wants to go as he swings back and forth a little bit. But just for those of you who know this horse, you know what I'm talking about here, who have ever met him or seen some of the previous videos. Just for him to walk around the ring like this, stretched all the way down and relaxed, is a huge feat, as it used to take, you literally couldn't take 5 or 6 steps on the horse without him spooking or becoming fixated on something that he would spook at, for the rest of the time you were riding him. So the fact that we can now just stretch him down and he'll stretch into the contact, and you'll see occasionally here how he'll look at something and I can just put my legs on, he just goes right back into the contact with the bridle, as opposed to going straight up in the air, which is what he would have been likely to do before. But how nicely he's able to walk forward here. You see there's no break in the neck. The neck is coming out long through the body, and look how the muscles are engaged along the top line. In other words, where are they the fattest? So look at the top of the neck, and we see how that's lit up the whole length of the top line all the way up to the pole. Now you can see when his pole gets a little too high, it starts to alter the walk. In other words, he starts to look like he wants to go lateral in the walk. And when I took on this horse, he laterally walked all the time. He had no regular 4-beat walk at all until we got him stretching. So that's always the case here when you see the walk. You see how even he comes up here, he gets a little too high, and he starts to drop the back out from underneath me. And then as soon as he drops his neck forward, we get back into a nice 4-beat walk. But once again, notice that this walk is a little stiffer than the day before, and I'm sure that was from the sitting trot that I did the day before, stiffened him up a little bit, but it didn't make him sore, and that's the important thing. There's a difference between, being a little stiff and muscle soreness, than just completely dropping the back and, and being completely sore in the back. So there's 2 different things there. That is, a little muscle soreness is not the same thing as the horse dropping its back and then having extreme pain in the back, which is what he used to do all the time. So notice here making this transition into trot, he's a little bit high-headed there as he makes that transition. I don't make a big deal of it. I just send him on forward with my legs, and pretty soon he drops right back down into the contact. And that's also part and parcel of just being a little tight over his back on this particular day after the work yesterday. But of course, you'll notice what I do is come immediately to the stretch here pretty soon and get him stretching over his back and swinging a little better. Now, at first here, I'm just testing it to see, okay, well, I didn't stretch him first, so where can I put him to, well, he'll be okay without getting too freaked out or over-responsive to anything. So here I come right to the stretch. Notice he's relieving himself, so that's always a good thing. Whenever horses can have a bowel movement, it helps them a great deal. That's why it's very important that we always encourage them to do that, because their backs will always feel softer, just like a person, if you're out doing some sport and you need to go to the bathroom, you're not going to be able to keep your mind on business, so to speak. Well, same thing is true of the horse. They need to be able to relieve themselves. But once again, notice here in the trot how he's able to keep the pole and neck up without breaking over. He's still coming nicely up through the back. Trot's not quite as nice as it was the day before. Once again, I think he's a little tired on this day. His back is a little bit stiff, but not so bad that there's anything that would preclude me from doing what I'm doing, as he comes around quite quickly into what I want him to do. Now, had he immediately broken over in the neck, just as in days of past, I would have immediately just stretched him all the way down and stayed there, or tried to bring him up until I was sure that wasn't going to happen. And you'll notice even here, once in a while, as soon as he does start to bend a little too much, then I'll put him back in the stretch. But here he's staying up very nicely. I ask for a little bit of a length in his stride here, which he does quite nicely. Tries to look at something. That's what you see, that little head lift there for a minute. But then he comes right through from my leg. You got to remember when I first began the work on this horse, he was so over-responsive to the leg. He really didn't respond to the leg. He ran away from it at best, and on the left side, he wouldn't even let you put it on. If you touched him with your left leg, he would just go completely out of his mind. So the fact that he will now move ahead of my legs is a big step in the right direction. And notice how the trot's starting to improve here a little bit. It's getting a little more spring into it now. Again, why the stretches are so important at every level. No matter what level your horse is, it begins in the same place. If it goes to Grand Prix, you go up to Grand Prix and you come back down through the stretch, in the end of your ride. Just like a person going to the gym. You warm up and you warm down. Horses work just the way we do. So if they don't have a good warm-up, you're probably going to have a stiff ride. But how nicely he tries to look at something there for a moment over there, but immediately just put my leg on and put him right back in the frame. And how nicely he's able to stay up through the neck here. Now remember, this is a horse that we literally just had to keep in the stretch for years to heal all of his problems. Now that doesn't mean that we didn't bring him up throughout all that time. We certainly did. But every time he came up and overbent at the neck, we just have to put him back out there. You simply have to wait for that to heal, but it will if you give it time. How beautifully he goes back into the stretch. And of course, the left side is the interesting thing with this horse. He was so bad to the left. He literally would not and could not bend to the left at all. If you put your leg on him, as I said before, he would just explode. So the fact that he's bending, and when you see I get to the canter part, it's really quite interesting because now the canter on the left side is actually better than the right side, and he's stretching completely on the left side now. So that tells me I've made a great deal of progress. So here he's still staying up very nicely, not over flexing. Doesn't quite have as much lift in the trot, as I said, as we had the day before. He's a little tireder on this particular day. You see he tries to look at something there, but I can immediately bend him to the left there, which I couldn't have done before, and take his mind right off of it. Whereas in days of old, that what you just saw there would have turned into a 10-foot leap into the center of the arena, an explosion, and away we could have gone. So he still looks at things occasionally, but I now have the tools, to send him beyond whatever he's looking at. In other words, he comes right back into the aids. So there's a cameraman there is what he's looking at, so he's kind of responding to my cameraman, sitting in a different place than they've been before. But once again, he doesn't look so much that I can't override that desire of his by putting my legs on and sending him back into the contact, and pretty soon I have him back in the stretch. And you can see there he kind of comes up a little too high. What happens, I brought him around there, he started to look at the cameraman, but you can see how I put my inside leg on, and I was able to put him right through that once again, and that's why I'm circling here, just to get him used to that. I never move on past any point. If he looks at something, I just stay right at that point until he's completely relaxed again, as you see him doing here, and then I will move on. That's why it's so important, for instance, to recognize the difference between horses that are really afraid and horses that have learned to spook as a resistance. Horses that are really afraid will actually start shaking and trembling. Now that's a horse that's about to lose its mind. If you're ever on a horse that's shaking and trembling, you want to get off because that's a horse that's about to go completely out of its mind. However, when they've learned this thing of spooking, that's how he was. I mean, he's working along, even now he works along for a little while, but when he gets tired, he doesn't want to do it anymore. He immediately starts doing his little tricks of spooking at every little thing because in the past he got away with this somewhere along the way. He bullied some people and got away with everything that he wanted to do, and they'd fought with him so much that he didn't care anymore. When I took on this horse, I mean, he would fight you to the death. I mean, there was no fighting him into anything or forcing him into anything. It had been tried so much with him, I feel, and once again, he must have won those battles. So the worst thing you can ever do with a young horse or any horse is when they spook is to stop and pet them on the neck, as I see so many people doing, thinking they're reassuring the horse. But what they've really done is pretty soon the horse figures out, well, if I spook, they'll stop and pet me on the neck, and I'll get out of the work. So that becomes a self-perpetuating problem, which is what it was with this horse. But as you can see now, he's really going quite well. And now he's become a little more supple. Notice how the back end is swinging over him, so underneath his body a little more. Once again, he's trying to react to the cameraman there by coming up, but you can see how quickly I can put my leg on and put him right back into the stretch. So I now have the tools to be able to ride this horse wherever I want to ride him and put him right back into the aids when he decides he's going to play his little games. And of course, on this particular day, he was a little stiffer, so he probably wasn't as willing to work as the day before. I think he felt a little stiff coming out. But instead of doing his usual thing, his old thing, that is of just going into a fight, he listens to my leg, comes forward, and I'm able to supple him and get him to where I want him to be. And without having to go through any fight, which of course takes a lot out of the horse and takes a lot of the riders as well. A good working trot here, clearly up through the pole. I'm very happy with all of this. Here I do another little lengthening. See how he tries to spook at something there. When you see those ears goes forward, he's trying to look at a little something, but I put my leg on and I can send him right back into the bridle again. So really, this is something that we've really only been able to achieve recently with this horse, is that our aids can now completely override his desires and his old habits, so to speak. And of course, I come right back to the stretch. That's the biggest thing in this form of riding is, getting sensitive to how your horse is feeling and being able to tell the difference between a horse that's just playing games with you or trying to get out of work, and one that actually can't do the work that you're doing. So that's a level of one's equestrian tact, to be able to discern which of those things is happening. Is the horse just deciding he's lazy and wants to get out of the work, or can he physically not do the work? You can see how nicely he comes across there and keeps his pole up. Now he's tried to look at something in that corner that time, as you can see, but once again, even that time he hardly came out of the bridle at all. I was able to put my leg right back on him and bend him to the left again. You can see there he starts to overbend. Once again, he starts trying to spook. I have to take a little more contact than I want for just a moment, and that overbent him for a second, but then I let it right back out and come back to the walk. So when you work a horse like this, you know, there may be those moments that he comes behind the bridle, as you saw him do with me there as I bring him up. But you notice I put him through and come right back to the stretch afterwards. So problems occur when training of horses all the time. We just have to be aware of the problems and how our response to that problem is going to change the horse for the future, so to speak. So now I'm going to begin the canter work. Well, this is the left side, which used to be his hardest side. I lifted his head a little higher than I would have wanted it to there in the strike off, but came into a nice canter, working clearly over his back. Now the left lead used to be, as soon as you started the left lead, he would just start going crazy and, you know, bucking up underneath you, and if you tried to put your left leg on, it would create a huge problem. But now for the first time, I'm actually able to even stretch his canter on the left side, which you see here. So it's very interesting. Very often when horses get over their backs, the side that we thought was stiff turns out to be the side that suddenly feels better. I've noticed that many times with horses. So for him, for instance, all of a sudden his left lead canter is better than it is on the right lead. But how nicely he stays up allows me to leg yield him over there. And now I come to the stretch. Now this is the part that I'm really happy with here, because this would have just been an impossibility in years past. He just, you know, the idea of stretching him on the left side was just impossible. So once again, that's also why his canter is so improving. Now that I can stretch the canter on this side, it really improves the canter a great deal. See how nicely he comes back up and stays uphill in the canter. So now I'm going to do a little counter canter with him. Always remembering that we always have to do counter canter before we do flying change. Otherwise, the counter canter will become very difficult. Remember, we take hunters that have been trained to do automatic changes. Those are the most difficult horses to work in the counter canter because they're so used to changing on their own. So very happy with that. Did that without any resistance. Once again, look how nicely he comes up in the pole in the canter and stays uphill. Still wants to be a little crooked, as you can see here in the canter. Sometimes he wants to line his outside shoulder to the wall, which makes horses a little crooked to the inside. So I'll have to work on getting that shoulder off the rail there a little bit. Now I'm coming up to the flying change. And notice how cleanly he does that flying change. Head came up a little bit high, but nothing bad at all. In days of old, when I would try to do flying changes, you know, you'd end up getting a bunch of bucks with it. That sort of thing. But now I'm on the right lead canter, but he's able to come right back into a good frame here. I didn't stop between the canters. I'm just going right on here today. Look how nice and open his canter now is. You know, it really looks like it's covering some ground forward, and it feels like that when you ride him. Staying uphill, you see he wants to look at something a little bit there, but I'm able to put my leg on and just send him right forward. So now I'm going to the counter canter with him. Now he did a beautiful flying change there, but that was not what I was asking for. So I come right back. Now you notice that I don't beat the horse up. I don't punish him for making a mistake. I just go back and repeat it. And here I'm going to do the same thing again. And he's going to make a mistake again. Does a nice flying change, but not what I'm asking for. So I come right back again. Just calmly back to the trot. Don't make any big deal of it. I don't punish him. I just go back and repeat the exercise again. And on the third try here, he does it. You never get angry with a horse for not doing something. You see he holds it quite nice. I didn't do a big canter. And notice how he tried to spook there at the end. I was able to put my leg on him, getting back into the contact again. I was a little conservative about because I wanted to just get the job done, which he did, and that's fine. I'll move on to the next day. Now here we go to do a flying change. He's a little bit late on the hindquarters on that, but comes through quite nicely and stays in the frame, so I'm happy with that. Got a little bit crooked coming across there, but no big deal for this level. Now I come back to the stretch again on the left side, which I'm so happy about being able to stretch this horse on the left. This shows me that I've come a long, long way with this horse, the fact that I can stretch him down in the left lead canter. And once again, that he would do all that canter work without any major resistance or feeling like he's bucking up underneath my back. He used to kind of make his own back sore because you try to do anything in the canter, he'd just start all this hopping up and down stuff and, you know, tensing his back, which made his back even worse. He was his own worst enemy, you might say, for quite a long time, this horse. So I'm very pleased with that. It makes it a lovely downwards transition right there without falling apart. And of course, I come back to the stretch after all that work. So I hope this gives you some perspective on how I would go about training a horse like this, and you can see a little bit of his development. This is Will Faerber from Art to Ride.